Today we are going to study about chapter 5 and discuss about chapter 5 sensory, attentional and perceptual processes. In this chapter we will going to look upon understand the nature of sensory processes, explain the processes and types of attention, analyze the problems of form and space perception, examine the role of socio-cultural factors in perception, and reflect on sensory, attentional, and perceptual processes in everyday life. So, in the previous chapter, fourth chapter of human development, we learned how we respond to various stimuli present in the external and internal environment with the help of our receptors. While some of these receptors are clearly observable, for example, eyes or ears, others lie inside our body and are not observable without the help of electrical or mechanical devices. So in this chapter we will going to look on various receptors that collect a variety of information from the external and internal worlds. The focus will be particularly on the structure and function of eye and ear, including some interesting processes associated with vision and audition. We will also look upon interesting things, and interesting processes associated with vision and audition, and attention, which help us to notice and register the information that our sense organs carry to us. Different types of attention will be described along with the factors that influence them. At the end, we will discuss the process of perception that allows us to understand the world in a meaningful way. Knowing the world. The world in which we live is full of variety of objects, people and events. Look at the room you are sitting in now. You will find so many things around. Just to mention a few, you may see your table, your chair, your books, your bag, your watch, pictures on the wall, and many other things. Their sizes, shapes, and colors are also different. If you move to other rooms of your house, you will notice several other new things. For example, pots and pans, almirah, etc. If you go beyond your house, you will find still many more things that you generally know about, such as trees, animals, buildings. Such experiences are very common in our day to day life. We hardly have to make any efforts to know them. If someone asks us, how can you say that these various things exist in your room or house or in the outside environment? We will most probably answer that we see or experience them all around us. In doing so, we are trying to tell the person that the knowledge about various objects becomes possible with the help of our sense organs. For example, eyes, ears. These organs collect information not only from the external world but also from our own body. The information collected by our sense organs forms the basis of all our knowledge. The sense organs register several kinds of information about various objects. However, in order to be registered, the objects and their qualities, for example, size, shape, color, must be able to draw our attention. The registered information must also be sent to the brain that constructs some meaning out of them. Thus, our knowledge of the world around us depends on three basic processes called sensation, attention, and perception. These processes are highly interrelated, hence, they are often considered as different elements of the same process called cognition. Nature and varieties of stimulus. The external environment that surrounds us contains a wide variety of stimuli. Some of them can be seen, for example, a house, while some can be heard only, for example, music. There are several others that we can smell, for example, fragrance of a flower, or taste, for example, sweets. There are still others be ex- that can experience that we can experience by touching, for example, softness of a cloth. All these stimuli provide us with various kinds of information. We have very specialized sense organs to deal with these different stimuli. As human beings, we are bestowed with a set of seven sense organs. These sense organs are also known as sensory receptors or information gathering systems because they receive or gather information from a variety of sources. Five of these sense organs collect information from the external world. These are eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. While our eyes are primarily responsible for vision, ears for hearing, nose for smell, and tongue for taste, skin is responsible for the experience of touch, warmth, cold, and pain. Specialized receptors of warmth, cold, and pain are found inside our skin. Besides these five external sense organs, we have also got two deep senses. They are called kinesthetic and vestibular systems. They provide us with important information about our body position and movement of body parts related to each other. With these seven sense organs, we register 10 different variety of stimuli. For example, we may notice whether a light is bright or dim, whether it is yellow, red, or green, and so on. With sound, we may notice whether it is loud or faint, whether it is melodious or distracting, and so on. These different qualities of stimuli are also registered by our sense organs. Now, sense modalities. Our sense organs provide us with first hand information about our external or internal world. The initial experience of a stimulus or an object registered by a particular sense organ is called sensation. It is a process through which we detect and encode a variety of physical stimuli. Sensation also refers to immediate basic experiences of stimulus attributes such as hard, warm, loud, and blue, which result from appropriate stimulation of a sensory organ. Different sense organs deal with different forms of stimuli and serve different purposes. Each sense organ is highly specialized for dealing with a particular kind of information. Hence, each one of them is known as a sense modality. Functional limitations of sense organs. Before we move on to a discussion of sense organs, it is important to note that our sense organs function with certain limitations. For example, our eyes cannot see things which are very dim or very bright. Similarly, our ears cannot hear very faint or very loud sounds. The same is true for other sense organs also. As human beings, we function within a limited range of stimulation. For being noticed by a sensory receptor, a stimulus has to be of an optimal intensity or magnitude. The relationship between stimuli and the sensations they evoke has been studied in a discipline called psychophysics. In order to be noticed, a stimulus has to carry a minimum value or weight. The minimum value of a stimulus required to activate a given sensory system is called absolute threshold or absolute limit. For example, if you add a granule of sugar to a glass of water, you may not experience any sweetness in that water. In addition of a second granule to water may also not make it taste sweet, but if you go on adding sugar granules one after another, there will come a point when you will say that the water is now sweet. The minimum number of sugar granules required to say that the water is sweet will be the absolute lemon, that is AL of sweetness. It may be noted at this point that the AL absolute lemon is not a fixed point. Instead, it varies considerably across individuals and situations depending on the people's organic conditions and their motivational states. Hence, we have to assess it on the basis of a number of trials. The number of sugar granules that may produce the experience of sweetness in water on 50% of occasions will be called the absolute lemon of sweetness. If you add more number of sugar granules, the chances are greater that the water will be reported more often as sweet than plain. As it is not possible for us to notice all stimuli, it is also not possible to differentiate between all stimuli. In order to notice two stimuli as different from each other, there has to be some minimum difference between the value of those stimuli. The smallest difference in the value of two stimuli that is necessary to notice them as different is called difference threshold or difference limit DL. To understand it, we may continue with our sugar water experiment. As we have seen, the plain water is experienced as sweet after the addition of certain number of sugar granules. Let us remember this sweetness. The next question is how many sugar granules will be needed in the water in order to experience its sweetness as different from the previous sweetness. Go on adding sugar granules one after another, tasting the water each time. After addition of a few granules, you will notice at a point that the water is now sweeter than the previous one. The number of sugar granules added to the water to generate an experience of sweetness that is different from the previous sweetness on 50% of the occasions will be called the difference limit. The number of sugar granules added to the water to generate an experience of sweetness that is different from the previous sweetness on 50% of the occasions will be called the difference limit of sweetness. Thus, difference threshold is the minimum amount of change in a physical stimulus that is capable of producing a sensation difference on 50% of the trials. Now you may realize by now that understanding of sensations is not possible without understanding the absolute limit and difference limit of different types of stimuli, for example, visual, auditory, but that is not enough. Sensory processes do not depend only on the stimulus characteristics. Sense organs and the neural pathways connecting them to various brain centers also play a vital role in this process. A sense organ receives the stimulus and encodes it as an electrical impulse. For being noticed, this electrical impulse must reach the higher brain centers. Any structural or functional defect or damage in the receptor organ, its neural pathway, or the concerned brain area may lead to a partial or complete loss of sensation. Now, visual sensation. Among all sense modalities, vision is the most highly developed in human beings. Various estimates indicate that we use it in approximately 80% of our transactions with the external world. Audition and other senses also contribute significantly to information gathering from the external world. We shall discuss vision and audition in further detail. So, visual sensation starts when light enters the eyes and stimulates our visual receptors. Our eyes are sensitive to a spectrum of light, the wavelength of which ranges from 380 nanometer to 780 nanometer. Nm refers to a nanometer, which is 1 billionth of a meter. No sensation is registered beyond this range of light. The human eye. So, our eye is made up of three layers. In the outer layer, there is a transparent cornea and a tough sclera that surrounds the rest of the eye. It protects the eye and maintains its shape. The middle layer is called choroid, which is richly supplied with blood vessels. The inner layer is known as retina. It contains the photoreceptors, rods and cones, and an elaborate network of interconnecting neurons. The eye is generally compared with the camera. For example, the eye and camera have the lens. The lens divides the eye into two unequal chambers, namely aqueous chamber and vitreous chamber. The aqueous chamber is located between the cornea and the lens. It is smaller in size and is filled with a water like substance called aqueous humor. The vitreous chamber is located between the lens and the retina. It is filled with a jelly like protein called vitreous humor. These fluids help in holding the lens at its appropriate place and in proper shape. They also allow enough flexibility for the occurrence of accommodation, a process through which the lens changes its shape in order to focus the objects at varying distances. This process is regulated by ciliary muscles, which are attached to the lens. These muscles flatten the lens to focus the distant objects and thicken it to focus the near objects. Like a camera, the eye also has a mechanism to control the amount of light entering to it. The wrist serves this purpose. It is a disc like colored membrane lying between the cornea and the lens. It controls the amount of light entering the eye by regulating pupil dilation. In dim light, the pupil dilates. In bright light, it contracts. Retina is the innermost layer of an eye. It is made up of five types of photosensitive cells, among which rods and cones are most important. Rods are the receptors for scotopic vision, night vision. They operate at low intensities of light and lead to achromatic, colorless vision. Cones are the receptors for photopic daylight vision. They operate at high levels of illumination and lead to chromatic color vision. Each eye contains about 100 million rods and about 7 million cones. The cones are highly concentrated in the central region of the retina surrounding the fovea, which is a small circular region of the size of a pea. It is also known as the yellow spot. It is the region of maximum visual acuity. Besides photoreceptors, retina also contains a bundle of axons of a cell called ganglion cell that forms the optic nerve which leads to the brain. So we see other human senses. Besides vision and audition, there are other senses that enrich our perceptions. For example, an orange looks attractive not only is because of it is color, but also because it has got a special flavor and taste. These other senses are briefly described here. First, smell. The stimulus for smell sensation consists of molecules of various substances contained in the air. They enter the nasal passage where they dissolve in moist nasal tissues. This brings them in contact with receptor cells contained in olfactory epithelium. Human beings possess about 50 million of these receptors, whereas dogs possess more than 20 million of these receptors. Nevertheless, our ability to detect smell is impressive. It is indicated that human beings can recognize and distinguish among approximately 10,000 10,000 different odors. The sense of smell also shows sensory adaptation like other senses. Second, taste. The sensory receptors for taste are located inside small bumps on the tongue known as papillae. In each papilla, there is a cluster of taste buds. Human beings possess almost 10,000 taste buds, while people claim to distinguish a large number of flavors in food. There are only four basic tastes, namely sweet, sour, bitter, and salty. How is it then that we perceive many more? The answer that we are aware not only of the taste of the food but also of its smell, its texture, its temperature, its pressure on our tongue, and many other sensations. When these factors are removed, we are left with only four basic tastes. Besides, a combination of different flavors in varied proportions results in a different kind of flavor which may be quite unique. Third, touch and other skin senses. Skin is a sensory organ that produces sensations of touch, pressure, warmth, cold, and pain. In our skin, there are specialized receptors for each one of these sensations. The receptors of touch are not evenly distributed in our skin. That is why some areas of our body, for example, face, fingertips, are more sensitive than others. For example, legs. Pain sensation has no specific stimulus, hence, determining its mechanism has been fairly difficult. Fourth, the kinesthetic system. Its receptors are found primarily in joints, ligaments, and muscles. This system gives us information about the location of our body parts in relation to each other and allows us to perform simple, for example, touching one's nose, and complex movements, for example, dancing. Our visual system provides a great deal of help. A visual system provides a great deal of help in this respect. Fifth, the vestibular system. This system gives us information about our body position, movement, and acceleration, the factors that are critical for maintaining our sense of balance. The sensory organs of this sense are located in the inner ear, while vestibular sacs inform us of our body positions. The semicircular canals inform us about our movements and acceleration. Now we will see Now we will see working of the eye passing through conjunctiva, cornea and pupil. The light enters the lens which focuses it onto the retina. Retina is divided into two parts, the nasal half and the temporal half. The inner half portion of the eye towards the nose, taking the center of fovea as midpoint, is called the nasal half. The outer half portion of the eye towards the temple from the center of fovea is called the temporal half. Light from the Light from the right visual field stimulates the left half of each eye, that is, the nasal half of the right eye and the temporal half of the left eye. And light from the left visual field stimulates the right half of each eye, that is, the nasal half of the left eye and the temporal half of the right eye. An inverted image of the object is formed on the retina. The neural impulse is transmitted to the visual cortex through the optic nerve, where the image is reinverted and processed. The optic nerve leaves the retina from the area that has no photoreceptors. So, in this area, visual sensitivity is completely absent. Therefore, it is called the blind spot. Adaptation. The human eye can function at a very large range of light intensities. Sometimes we have to undergo a rapid change in illumination levels. For example, when we go to a matinee show movie, we find it difficult to see things in the hall on entering into it. However, after spending about 15 to 20 minutes there, we are able to see everything. After the show, when we go out into the open, we find the light outside the hall too bright to see things, or sometimes even to keep our eyes open. However, with a minute or so, we feel comfortable and are able to see things properly. This adjustment is faster than the one made on entering the hall. The process of getting adjusted to different intensities of light is called visual adaptation. Next is light adaptation. It refers to the process of adjusting to bright light after exposure to dim light. This process takes nearly a minute or two. On the on the other hand, dark adaptation refers to the process of adjusting to a dimly illuminated environment after exposure to bright light. This may take half an hour or even longer depending on the previous level of exposure of the eye to light. There are certain ways in which these processes can be facilitated. Photochemical basis of light and dark adaptation. Photochemical basis of light and dark adaptation. You may wonder why the light and dark adaptations take place. According to the classical view, light and dark adaptations occur due to certain photochemical processes. The rods have a photosensitive chemical substance called rhodopsin or visual purple, By the action of light, the molecules of this chemical substance get bleached or broken down. Under such conditions, the light adaptation takes place in the eyes. On the other hand, the dark adaptation is achieved by the removal of light and thereby allowing for restorative processes to regenerate the pigment in the rods with the help of vitamin A. The regeneration of rhodopsin in rods is a time consuming process. That is why dark adaptation is a slower process than light adaptation. It has been found that people who suffer from vitamin A deficiency do not achieve dark adaptation at all and find it really difficult to move in the dark. This condition is generally known as night blindness. A parallel chemical believed to be found in cones is known as iodopsin. A parallel chemical believed to be found in cones is known as iodopsin. Color vision. In our interaction with the environment, we not only experience a variety of objects but also their colors. In our interaction with the environment, we not only experience a variety of objects but also their colors. It may be noted that color is a psychological property of our sensory experience. It is created when our brain interprets the information received from the external world. It may be remembered that light is described physically in terms of wavelength, not in terms of color. As we have read earlier, the visible spectrum is a range of energy 380 to 780 nanometer that our photoreceptors can detect. The energy lower or higher than the visible spectrum is harmful to the eyes. The sunlight is a perfect mixture of seven colors, just like a rainbow. The colors observed are violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red, abbreviated as VIBGYOR. The dimensions of color. A person with normal color vision can distinguish more than 7 million different shades of color. Our experiences of color can be described in terms of three basic dimensions called hue, saturation, and brightness. Hue is a property of chromatic colors. In simple words, it refers to the name of the color. For example, red, blue, and green. Hue varies with wavelength, and each color is identified with a specific wavelength. For example, blue has a wavelength of about 465 nanometer and green of about 500 nanometer. Achromatic colors like black, white, or gray are not characterized by hues. Saturation is a psychological attribute that refers to the relative amount of hue of a surface or object. The light of single wavelength monochromatic appears to be highly saturated. As we mix different wavelengths, the saturation decreases. The color gray is completely unsaturated. Brightness is the perceived intensity of light. It varies across both chromatic and achromatic colors. White and black represent the top and bottom of the brightness dimension. White has the highest degree of brightness, whereas black has the lowest degree. Color mixtures. There is an interesting relationship among colors. They form complementary pairs. When mixed in correct proportions, the complementary colors yield an achromatic gray or white. Examples of complementary colors are red, green, and yellow, blue. Red, green, and blue are called primary colors because when mixing the light of these three colors can produce almost any color. The most common example is the television screen. It contains spots of blue, red, and green colors. The combinations of these three produce different colors and shades that we see on the TV screen. After images. This is quite an interesting phenomenon related to visual sensations. The effect of a visual stimulus persists for some time even after the removal of that stimulus from the visual field. This effect is called after image. After images are positive and negative. Positive after images resemble the original stimulus in terms of hue, saturation, and brightness. They usually occur after a brief intense stimulation of dark adapted eyes. On the other hand, negative after images appear in complementary colors. These images appear when a person stares at the patch of a particular color for at least 30 seconds and then transfers the gaze to a neutral background, for example, a white or gray surface. If the person looks at the blue color, the negative after image will appear in blue. Similarly, a red stimulus will yield a negative afterimage of green color. Auditory sensation. Audition or hearing is also an important sense modality that carries great value for us. It provides us with reliable spatial information. Besides orienting us to certain objects or individuals, it plays a vital role in spoken communication also. Auditory sensation begins when sound enters our ear and stimulates the chief organs of hearing. The human ear. Ear is the primary receptor of auditory stimuli. While its well known function is hearing, it also helps us in maintaining our body balance. The structure of an ear is divided into three segments called the external ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. External ear, it contains two main structures, namely pinna and auditory meters. Pinna is a cartilaginous funnel shaped structure that collects sound waves from the surroundings. Auditory meters is a canal protected by hair and wax that carries sound waves from pinna to the tympanum or eardrum. Middle ear. The middle ear starts with tympanum, a thin membrane highly sensitive to sound vibrations. This is followed by the tympanic cavity. It is connected to the pharynx with the help of eustachian tube, which maintains the air pressure in tympanic cavity. From the cavity, the vibrations pass to three ossicles known as malleus, hammer, incus anvil, and stapes, stirrup. They increase the intensity of sound vibrations about 10 times and send them to the inner ear. Inner ear. The inner ear has a complicated structure known as membranous labyrinth, which is encapsulated in a bony shell called bony labyrinth. A lymph like fluid is found in the space between bony labyrinth and membranous labyrinth. This is called perilymph. The bony labyrinth has three semicircular canals at right angle to each other, a cavity called vestibule and a coil structure called cochlea. The semicircular canals have fine hair cells which are highly sensitive to postural changes as well as changes in the body orientation. Inside the bony cochlea, there is a membranous cochlea, which is also known as scala media. It is filled with endolymph and has a spirally coiled membrane called basilar membrane. It has got fine hair cells arranged in a series to form the organ of Corti. This is the main organ for hearing. Working of the ear. Pinna collects the sound vibrations and serves them to the tympanum through the auditory meters. From the tympanic cavity, the vibrations are transferred to the three ossicles, which increase their strength and transmit them to the inner ear. In the inner ear, the cochlea receives the sound waves through vibrations. The endolymph is set in motion, which also vibrates the organ of Corti. Finally, the impulses are sent to the auditory nerve, which emerges at the base of cochlea and reaches the auditory cortex, where the impulse is interpreted. Sound as a stimulus. We all know that sound is the stimulus for ears. It results from pressure variations in the external environment. Any physical movement disturbs the surrounding medium, that is air, and pushes the air molecules back and forth. This results in changes in pressure that spread outward in the form of sound waves traveling at a rate of about 1100 feet per second. These changes travel in waves much like the ripples set up by a stone thrown into a pond. When these sound waves strike our ears, they initiate a set of mechanical pressure changes that ultimately trigger the auditory receptors. The simplest kind of sound wave is one that causes successive pressure changes over time in the form of a single repeating sine wave. Sound waves vary in amplitude as well as in wavelength. Amplitude is a general measure of stimulus magnitude. Amplitude is a general measure of stimulus magnitude. It is the amount of change in pressure, that is, the extent of displacement of the molecules from their position of rest. The amplitude of the sound wave is represented as the distance of the crest or trough from its mean position. Wavelength is the distance between the two crests. Sound waves are basically formed due to alternate compression and decompression, rarefaction of air molecules. A complete change in pressure from compression to rarefaction and again to compression makes a cycle of the wave. Sound waves are described in terms of their frequency, which is measured in terms of cycles per second. Its unit is called hertz. Hz, capital H and small z. Frequency and wavelength have an inverse relationship. When the wavelength increases, the frequency decreases, and when the wavelength decreases, the frequency increases. Amplitude and frequency both are physical dimensions. Besides these, there are three psychological dimensions of sound, namely loudness, pitch, and timbre. Loudness of the sound is determined by its amplitude. Sound waves with large amplitude are perceived as loud, those with small amplitude are perceived as soft. Loudness is measured in decibels dB, which refers to highness or lowness of a sound. The seven notes used in Indian classical music represent a gradual increase in their pitch. Frequency of determines the Frequency determines the pitch of a sound wave. The higher the frequency, the higher will be the pitch. The range of hearing is generally 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. Timbre refers to the nature or quality of a sound. For example, the sound of a car engine and a person talking differ with respect to quality or timbre. The timbre of a sound reflects the complexity of its sound waves. Most of the sounds found in natural environments are complex.